Welcome back to BluOcean Talks. My name is Ron Efron. I'm here once again with my friend and a lawyer that I worked with a lot in the past, Zach Lichtblau. How you doing, Zach?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm great. So this is what your third time I think we're talking with you on this cast,
Mhm.
and the purpose to getting together again today is to kind of follow up on the whole PIPL and data security law and the cybersecurity laws in China that have been developing over the last couple of years. But before we get into that, I digress a little bit. For those that don't that are meeting Zach here on the cast for the first time, he's a lawyer practicing, or I don't know if I should say practicing, but based in Shanghai.
Yeah, not
Has
practicing.
Yeah. So, how would you describe it? Give maybe a little brief intro of the great things you're doing in Shanghai and how you help companies there.
Yeah, I would say I am advising. I'm not practicing in the sense that I'm as a foreigner in China, what I do cannot be classified as practicing. But of course, we have a team of Chinese lawyers here as well,
Hmm.
and for all intensive purposes, we are servicing the needs of international companies in China and everything they need from when they first think about getting into China through setting up their entities, through compliance and commercial contracts and labor issues and litigation when the company exists, and
Right.
all the way through liquidation and hopefully not bankruptcy for people and all
Right.
those kind of issues. So from
And that's interesting
cradle to
because
grave.
actually a lot of law firms have, I don't know if a lot, but I've heard in the news, many multinational kind of firms have exited China. They decided it's just
Yeah.
too much trouble to navigate the landscape there. You kind of found a way to do it to provide value to your clients and everything. And if I remember correctly, you can even do like or your firm can even do like litigation, like court work, and the whole gambit, right?
Yes, so we are set up as a Chinese law firm. So there are Chinese partners that are working with us, and that they are the formal owners, and they also have their own practice here. And we have a
Mm.
team that is working in litigation as well. And actually, litigation work has been increasing in the past few years. You can see more commercial disputes, and some of them end up in Chinese courts.
Mm.
And
Well,
yeah, that's
maybe we should talk about that for a second. But just
yeah.
so I could totally recommend Zach and his firm. We will add contact information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to reach out to him afterwards. But before we dive into the whole the purpose of the cast, really, can you talk a little bit why do you think there's been an increase in litigation and as such?
I think it's a little bit, of course, what we see as a law firm is always, it's not necessarily indicative of the whole economy, but maybe to some people it is, because like a lot of times I say, like, if people talk to me about joint ventures, then I would say, okay, well, I've done a lot of joint venture work, and that a lot of times I deal with the breakups when things
Mm,
don't go well. So that gives me an indication that things always don't go well, but that's not
mm.
necessarily the case.
Like a
Um,
divorce lawyer, probably.
yeah, like a divorce lawyer probably thinks like that all marriages end in divorce because he just sees a lot of divorces.
Right.
But it's not necessarily like that. And we have done some what I like to call positive work of setting up structures and commercial contracts with a positive outlook with optimistic clients.
Mm,
But we have seen more of the negative work coming in. I think in some cases it's companies that are exiting China. Sometimes it will be issues of employee malfeasance that they find out after a long time that somebody was stealing from the company or was having a side company, a side business that was actually
mm.
profiting off their
A
business without them
common
knowing.
a common
Yeah.
old scam, yes.
Yeah, but it's being revealed more and more. I think maybe when times are good financially, you don't notice it that much, and then
uh,
when there's a financial crunch, you tend to pay more attention to
right.
these things.
At a low tide, you
Yeah,
see who's not wearing
yeah,
their swimming trunks.
yeah, precisely. or people are start blaming each other, and then you find out, or those kind of situations. And also, we've seen more, kind of like even commercial scams, like in trade, that
Mm,
people say, oh, that this factory is going to manufacture it, but it's not that factory; it's a different factory, and or the goods don't come, or those
mm,
kind of little scams
mm,
that are sometimes could be big scams depending on the amounts.
mm.
So those are seem to be back in fashion. You see, we get more of those now, and less of
Interesting.
the traditional work of setting up new businesses. Although I have to say that's happening as well. And we
Mm,
actually had an interesting talk with some of our European clients last week, and they're actually saying that they've seen more more interest in business in China lately
mm.
than before.
So
So,
what's your kind of 40,000 foot observation of the current um, economy, our environment, our feelings in China?
well, I think that there is kind of like, especially with everything that's been going on between China and the U.S. lately, there is a feeling that things are unstable. The economy's not been doing very well, and I think people feel it also in the job market. Um, but I think that I mean, I'm almost always try to be an optimistic person, so I would say that there is hope that things will get better, and that that some businesses are going to come back, or that there's going to be the other businesses are trying to really shift their way of working, and maybe international businesses try to rely less on China, but at the same time, they're not going to give it up
Mm,
completely.
mm,
So it's just maybe a different kind of engagement.
mm,
And that also affects us. So we're also trying to be more involved in Southeast Asia, maybe do some business there.
mm.
Um, but uh, but of course, we maintain our presence here, and we still view this as the core of our activity.
And again, just one more question that kind of comes up, and to the extent that you can answer this,
Mm.
how are courts treating like international like complaints from international companies, or are they? Would you say that things are mm, that they're being treated fairly and well and professional, or is there anything you can say about that? And if not, then that's okay. We can move on to another topic.
Yeah, I think from my encounters, and again, it's idiosyncratic, but I haven't seen any negative treatment of foreign companies by the court system, and I would say by it to some extent by the administrative system. There is actually sometimes it actually is a benefit to be a foreign company
Mm,
if
mm,
you're in a trouble situation. There are situations where, and this could depend on the atmosphere, that maybe there will be increased scrutiny uh, to foreign invested companies, uh, maybe by media, maybe by, just some specific officials. But on the whole, I would say that, foreign companies do have another channel that they can use sometimes to try to solve their issues, and that just by mentioning that that we are a foreign company, and we if you treat us badly, it does reflect badly on the way that
mm,
China, or that your city, or your
right.
district or your province treats foreign businesses. If this is something that's unfair, but it's not. I mean, most of the times that I see that there are issues like that, it's sometimes there are issues with the way that the foreign company acted, or
Mm,
or there are other problems around them that are not
right.
necessarily related to them.
That makes sense, and it has been my personal experience that the authorities, especially at the local level, are generally want to be seen as professional and fair, and they do make an effort to make that happen. But if the company's not dotting their I's and crossing their T's, then other things can happen. Which is why you need good legal advice in China, and that's always important.
Yeah.
So can we move on? So just to as a recap here, trying to introduce a series of how would you say it's like laws that started with the personal information protection law and also the
Yeah.
data security law. There's a cybersecurity law. They kind of or how would you introduce it? Because before we get into, I want to hear like how things evolved over the year or so since we last talked. But for those that are kind of new to the topic, how would you just give a little introduction of how we got where this all came from?
I would say there's an increased emphasis in China on the issue of data security, and personal data, and that's an arc that's been developing over the past few years. I think some of the early issues that were dealt with. I mean, there was the Rio Tinto affair, which was like over 10 years ago, I think.
Mm,
That was, but that was more of an issue which of national security, where there was some data that was the allegation was that was transferred outside of China that was national security data because it was talking about China's consumption of certain maybe iron ore or other metals, and um, and people got themselves in trouble, and they were not really clear. It wasn't really clear what they did that was problematic, at least not at the outset. Later on, it turned out to be a bit more problematic, but it made the whole issue of data come to the fore, and then rules started being promulgated, laws. We're talking about the cybersecurity law, and later on the personal information protection law, which are like really the two main legislations. Of course, there are many other laws and regulations that came with them, and I would say that these rules and regulations deal with, and again, I'm trying to do it with really broad strokes here,
mm,
um, deal with the way that the data is collected, processed, handled, and also transferred cross-border. And they deal mainly, the two main focuses that I think we can talk about are what's known as important data, which is data that is considered to be detrimental to national security or public safety if it would be leaked or destroyed.
mm-hmm.
Um, and personal information, so which is pretty self-explanatory, would be the information that will identify a person. We're talking about the personal information of people within China.
Right. And from that extent, that has been a trend around the world. Really, many countries or most countries, I think, have developed some sort of similar laws and regulations over the last 5 to 10 years or so.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And actually, when we're talking about personal information, the Chinese the Chinese data laws are very, very similar
Mm,
to the European model of GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations.
right.
So it's not the same, and there are some small differences, and there's some differences in the way that the law is applied. But I would say that generally our European clients find it much easier to understand PIPL than ones that haven't
GDPR.
dealt with Europe, because it's very, very similar. At the same time, the cross-border element is something that took time to develop, and it was something that was there even before the data laws, or before the PIPL, because if you remember when we talked about the cybersecurity law
Mm,
way back, one of the main issues was about restricting data flows cross-border. And that's been a major issue that, first of all, when that law came, already a lot of companies started getting stressed about their activities in China. I think some companies were even deterred from entering China because of that legislation, because of the whole requirement to localize their data collection
but
and
part
and to
sorry,
have
but
all
part of
the,
that
yeah,
was sorry, but part of that was because of there's some lack of clarity around the laws, correct, right?
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of times, and this is the general rule in China, also in some other jurisdictions, but in China, it's just, you just feel
It's
it
common, yeah.
stronger. It's that when a law comes, it's very, very broad strokes, very, this is what's going to happen. And then you know that something big is happening, but you don't understand exactly how it's going to affect you. And then you could either assume the best or assume the worst of what it means.
Hmm.
And then later on, there are some implementing regulations which clarify it and give you a little bit more, hopefully, comfort, sometimes stress, because you need to start complying. Usually, the laws are not enforced immediately. They're, if there are these places that are unclear, but once they're implemented, once you see the details, then you know that implementation is going to come, and with it, maybe penalties and other issues. So I think generally that's the story of what's been happening since our last conversation, is that there's been added clarity, not completely, not everywhere, and there's been more enforcement, and and the enforcement is usually that's the more
Right.
interesting part for people to listen to. But um, I think that there is still room for development, and we're still waiting for some things to be cleared.
See.
And we've seen, actually, when I talked about the stuff that we've been doing, another area that we're active in more and more is compliance.
Hmm.
And I would say that the data compliance is one subset of it. There are a few others, like advertising law and a few other laws that really uh, put the perspective of, okay, this is, you need to make sure that your company complies with these rules. And now it's clear what you have to comply with.
Hmm. That's interesting. So just to your point, it seems like the government in China, once they introduce a new law with broad strokes, like you're saying, and it
Yeah.
seems like they kind of listen to the market for a period of time and then make some adjustments based on what they
Yeah.
think is reasonable and et cetera. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I would say not only listen in the metaphorical sense, that also in the actual sense, there are a lot of these regulations are circulated for comments. Some regulations are even circulated for comments by foreign chambers of commerce.
Mm,
So there's it's actually the Chinese government is very receptive to listen to legislate, not in that they're not legislating in a vacuum.
right.
So they are listening to what certain people have to say. Maybe not everybody, but
Of course.
definitely those that their opinion matters.
So I remember when this started, people were kind of, like you said, like worried, and even some people even freaked out, not sure what to do. And I remember from, we do security systems. We had this whole kind of question about, well, how do you deal with the HR database and or the
Mm,
security database, and can
yeah,
you have copies outside of the country if you're in China? Anyway, so all these
yeah.
questions came up, and at the beginning there really weren't kind of clear answers to that. And when we last talked about it, you were saying that actually things became more clear and easier to deal with and manage, and I was doing some of my own homework here. So maybe give us a couple examples of where do things stand today, and what has evolved over the last year or so
Mhm.
around these laws.
So there are, I think there are certain developments, especially when we're talking about the cross-border element.
Mm,
Um, it's one thing that is clear is that you need to have um, a personal information. If the personal information that you're collecting in China is being processed outside of China, um, there are certain things you need to do. It's not that you cannot do it, but there are certain things you need to do. First
mm,
of all, like the basic rules that I think we discussed in a previous conversation, when
Can
you're
you
dealing with
remind,
personal,
sorry,
yeah,
Zach,
yeah,
can you
like,
remind people what processing means? Because that's kind of it's not intuitive sometimes
yeah,
what that means,
yeah. Okay,
within this
I want
context.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So basically, when we're talking about personal data, data that identifies a person, um, you need to, there are certain rules that you need to keep in mind. One is you don't collect it if you don't need it. You shouldn't just collect it for the sake of collection. It should be for a purpose. The other is consent. You should only collect personal information if the owner of the information, meaning the person, agrees to it, which means that you should have procedures in place to make sure that the person consents. Um, the third element when we're talking about processing is that if you transfer the information to somebody else that helps you deal with that information, for example, the HR department or your external HR consulting company, that needs to be, again, minimize the use, minimize the retention, minimize the distribution of the data. So only for the purposes that are actually necessary to complete the purpose of the
Mm.
collection. And, uh, and it's even enhanced when we're talking about cross-border movement. Um, so if we're talking about, let's say, an overseas organization that has a subsidiary in China, and they're managing their HR globally, and certain HR information is going to be transferred overseas, then the overseas headquarters is considered to be an overseas personal information processor, and they should have a relationship with, they should have a representative in China, which you could say is relatively easy. That's probably their subsidiary in China is their representative. But we need to designate the person in that organization specifically, and we need to make a report to the local CAC, and that's the Cybersecurity Administration,
Right.
and that's done. I would say a lot of companies are not doing that yet, but that's a process that is being done. It's relatively simple.
Mm.
It's not that complicated. Um, However, there's also other things that you need to do before you transfer information overseas. And that's also something that's been clarified. Uh, so we're talking about, it's known as the three pillars.
Right.
So three pillars are security assessment, standard contract, and certification. You need to do one of these three things normally if you transfer personal information overseas. Now, the security assessment is really for the big players. Those are people that transfer over data of over 1 million people
Mm.
a year, or over 100,000 if we're talking about sensitive personal information, which would include either,
Employees and
like, yeah, or like medical
mm.
information, or data relating to like ID numbers, those
Mm.
kind of things, or any personal information of minors is also considered sensitive. So if you're doing that, then you need to do a security assessment. It's a lot more complicated. Um, but the solution that's given to the ones that are, I would say, for most, I wouldn't even say most of our listeners, but those that are uh, still with relatively big operations in China, if you transfer between 100K and 1 million, uh, or if you transfer any number of sensitive personal information, you need to have a standard contract.
What does that mean? What is it? What give us some more context.
So the standard contract would be a contract between the entity that collected the information in China and the entity that processes the information overseas,
I see.
to make sure that the processing of the information follows Chinese rules.
Mm.
the Chinese
Okay.
guidelines.
So it's a contract not between the data owner, the individual, and
Yeah,
the entity in China, but between the entity in China and their relative entity outside of China or non-relative entity, if that
yeah,
means that, right?
yes. Now, there are some exemptions,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where the HR issue that you mentioned comes in.
Mm,
So the first of all, you see it's already kind of a relief. People hear these numbers, it's already like, oh, okay,
right,
things are not as bad as I thought they were, you know.
right.
But notice that for sensitive personal information, it's any number.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're in the habit of sending your, the ID numbers of your Chinese employees to the headquarters, you need to have a standard contract. And that standard contract also needs to be submitted to the CAC.
But that it sounds like that's not a complicated process to get a contract
Yes,
signed and
not
to submit it. That's not a complicated process. Okay,
precisely. It's not the end of the world.
right.
Um, there's another process that's certification that could substitute the standard contract, but at this stage, it's still one of those things that's unclear. So
Mm,
maybe it will be for our next talk,
okay.
but we still don't know how that's working. So most people just opt for the standard contract. And there's also this employee exemption. What you need to remember is that employee exemption is limited. Um, that in the sense that it's unclear whether it applies to sensitive personal information. Most likely doesn't
Mm.
apply to it, and it does not apply to candidates.
Okay, so
So
those that were thinking about hiring but have not yet formal
yeah,
employees.
yes,
So a good practice would be like to simply try to avoid overly sensitive information, just stick to a name
yeah,
and yeah. I wonder if a
and
resume would be sensitive or not, like all the back. It
yeah.
could be.
Well, I would say the safest thing to do is just to have a standard contract. It's
Right.
not that complicated.
Good point.
But yeah, and so you see, like there's kind of an element of relief here. You
Mm-hmm.
see, like, okay, it's not as complicated, it's not as terrifying as we thought about, but there's still those rules that need to be followed, though
Mm,
those rules regarding making sure that you don't collect more than you need, you don't disseminate to more people than you need, and that's something there's already case law about this.
mm,
Um, and um, and those are the things uh, that are really core.
okay. So why don't
Um,
so why don't we jump into that then? Like so tell do you know of any cases or interesting cases that you could share with our listeners that
um,
kind of represent um
yeah,
these laws? Yeah.
definitely there's been some really interesting things happening.
Mm,
And I just want to I had a few numbers here that I wanted to check just so because those the numbers don't are not always in front of me.
right.
But yeah, the big case that was which I think was already on the last time we spoke, but that was DD.
Mm. The
So
the
DD
the the
was
car the car hailing app
the
in
car
China.
hailing
Yeah, yeah.
service. Yeah. So that was back in 2022. They were fined 8 billion yuan
Wow.
for PIPL violations. Um, they collected over almost 12 million screenshot information from users' phone. They had excessive collection of 8.3 billion pieces of user clipboard information and application list information. They had excessive collection of 107 million pieces of passenger facial recognition. Uh, and and one of the reasons that they were fined was they were actually warned before and they didn't do anything about it.
Mm. That's
And
a good point because sometimes in China they do that. You might hear like a warning from the authorities first or some sort of and to give you a chance to rectify the problem.
yeah, but it's a really, I think it was a really good judgment, in the sense a good signal to the
Mm,
public, that we're not going to allow companies to to take advantage of your information this way. Of course,
Mm,
there's a long way to go, but it really is a good thing. And and there's been a more recent case in September 2023 of CNKI, that's China National Knowledge Infrastructure, and they were fined 50 million renminbi, a lot less, but it's also a lot smaller organization. But it's also a lot about, you could say what they were charged with is not as outrageous as what Didi was charged with,
mm,
but they definitely held more information than they needed to. They kept logs of people that stopped being their members.
mm,
Um, so it's being taken seriously, you can see. And
mm.
you can even see smaller cases with smaller people. The smallest one I could find was a restaurant that got fined 200 RMB for basically forcing patrons to join their to give unnecessary information when they're
Mm,
ordering food.
mm.
So like you ordered food, you have to, these days in China, a lot of places you don't really get a menu when you sit
I
down. You
know.
need to scan a QR code and then,
I hate it. Yeah.
yeah, me too. But then you have to, they, basically your phone tells you if you don't put in your birthday,
Right.
you can't order food. And
Right.
so,
Right. They already have your
so
phone
that's
number and
also
everything.
something.
So
Yeah, 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 yeah,
in anticipation of this cast, I asked ChatGPT for some cases, and one
yeah,
interesting came that up that's like kind of the opposite, the other side of the spectrum that you mentioned.
yeah.
I don't know what company it is, but it seems to be like a European hotel chain that
Yeah.
an individual, a Chinese national, sort of registered for their membership, a
Okay.
loyalty program, and that data was transferred overseas, and he
Yeah,
got like marketing solicitations from that or something along those lines, and that went to court in Guangzhou.
I think I know the case. Yeah.
And I asked for more details about it. It's interesting, but the bottom line is that they were
This Mr.
fined.
Zuo, maybe?
Um, I don't have names. I
Yeah,
don't have names here.
yeah,
But the fine was like 20,000 RMB or something. And another fine, they had to give
yeah,
compensation
yeah.
to the plaintiff of 20,000 RMB. So it wasn't a big amount, but I'm sure that it's still the cost
Yeah.
and hassle of dealing with this probably cost them a
Hmm.
lot more than that. But this is a European firm, and they had a they so they have to they got feedback that they have to manage their loyalty program in better ways, and they according to this they need to get a separate consent
For the
for the
cross-border bit.
marketing for the cross border and for the marketing
Yeah,
component of it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I know that the case that they were also, and it was also a question of like who gets that information on the cross-border,
right,
who gets, because my understanding is the guy only wanted to book a hotel. He
exactly,
didn't
right.
want a membership program. He didn't want to get solicited by them. And they were not really paying attention to that. And then a lot of people in their organization that had nothing to do with his request get access to his data.
Right.
And that's also something that's, it's against the whole minimization rule, that you shouldn't be following.
But these are not
Uh,
unreasonable cases, right? I
yeah,
mean, these are reasonable cases that people would argue that are for the well-being of the users living in China.
definitely. Yeah, it would be good. Like you could say it's consumer protection in a way.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm sure what triggered this is that the individual probably complained, and that's probably triggered it. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have come up.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to say anything about this individual or this individual case, but I have seen cases there. I would say not just like I'm zooming out from data, but stuff that relates to compliance in general, that we've seen maybe companies using your non-compliance as a weapon. Your
Yes, yeah,
competitors can use your non-compliance as a weapon. A big area where we've been seeing this is with the advertising law. Um, because China's advertising laws are also very consumer protecting.
Right.
And
So just for those that don't know, it comes up something like you can't have a false statement. So you can't say
yeah,
something like we are the best in the
yeah,
industry or something like that, right? You have to be
yeah.
actually backed up by facts and everything.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, you could say that we're the best is not necessarily a false statement, but if you cannot prove it,
Right.
then you should not make it.
Right.
It's even less than that. And we've actually had cases like this that we've had to defend our clients. And sometimes they had like good ways of defending themselves. One such way was basically they said like we didn't say that we were the best.
Right.
We were just mentioning
Quoting.
that this publication thinks we're the best. So when you're referring to somebody else stating it, it's not really a claim that you're making. The claim that you're making is
Yeah.
true.
But if it's on your website,
It's difficult. Yeah.
then it's difficult,
Yeah.
right? So and I've heard cases like that, like on your website or marketing material saying
Yeah.
such subjective claims like that, and companies
Yeah.
getting into trouble.
Yeah. Superlatives are in general are dangerous.
Yeah.
Don't use them. And then you see like your competitors would maybe anonymously make a complaint or would use a person to make a complaint and then you find yourself negotiating with the authorities for the amount of fine that you're going to have to pay or rectifications and all those kind of things. And I could see those kind of things happening in data as well. So
Mm.
it's another way of just weakening you and making you deal with a lot of extra hassle. So actually, to invest in compliance is a good way of also making yourself less vulnerable for these kind of tactics from competitors.
Right. So if you could show the authorities that you made a genuine best effort to comply with the law
Yeah.
by showing the compliance and everything, then you probably win some points. Is that what you mean? Or
Well, to some extent, I mean, it's not so much that it's a best effort. Usually, the best effort in these fields leads to a better result. I mean,
mm,
of course, we're not talking about things like data leaks, but if there's a data leak or those kind of situations, you obviously need to show that you've taken precautions,
mm,
and this was not a result of negligence.
mm,
But if we're talking about this excessive collection or not destroying data when you're supposed to destroy it or transferring it unnecessarily. These are things that you can just put
right.
as guidelines and rules in your organization. You need to have people to enforce it. And if you show the authority, look, we have a person, a data officer that's dealing with these things, and we're reporting regularly. We had signed all the contracts, and we have the consent of the data subjects, and we're making sure that it's collected diligently, and that there's a positive buy-in it's not just tick the box if you don't want to share. It's more like ticks the box
If you do,
and
yeah.
share.
Oh,
Yeah. So
okay.
yeah,
So
it's
what's
much
down
easier.
in the pipeline? I saw one other thing here that I wanted to talk to you about. The whole issue with facial recognition. If for those that
Mm.
have been in China or spent time in China, know that it's a big part of the daily life sometimes.
Yeah.
Everything from visitor management systems or getting into buildings, and for Chinese nationals, it could
Mm.
be like part of a payment system. It's
Yeah.
pretty. You see it a lot, and apparently there's some new regulations that are going to be coming out. Do you know anything about that?
Um, I have to say I haven't looked into that yet.
Okay. Well, this is closer
So
to the security kind of sphere, so
yeah,
I've been looking into that. But basically, it's
yeah,
in response to the privacy concern. I do know from other
yeah,
if you follow this that
yeah.
some citizens, some population in China were complaining about this because it would
Mhm.
pop up in all sorts of ways where my partner who lives in Beijing, he's Chinese national. He likes telling the story how he was at a vending machine
Yeah,
and the vending machine, without prompting in some way, just by seeing his face, knew who he was.
yeah,
and
and
it was
said
all connected
hello.
to
Yeah, yeah,
Alibaba and all those things.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
he
yeah.
was like taken aback by
You
that.
feel violated. Yeah,
Right. So I think that those kind of things kind of led to this, but basically it's going to, again, according to ChatGPT here,
yeah,
the new rules will stipulate that individuals should not be compelled to use facial recognition if they don't want to. That you must offer alternative verification methods, must be
yeah.
provided, and clear signage needs to be required where facial recognition technology is deployed. And there's probably other things. So I think that kind of falls into the whole PIPL realm of things.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think to some extent there is kind of already a possibility to use current laws to do something with it. So,
Mm,
but there might need to be clarifications because it's like with a lot of things, technology is ahead of the legal
right.
infrastructure. And of course, we see technology companies just going wild with data, and they're basically given free range. So they should be limited,
Mm,
and I'm all for this kind of legislation. I think
mm,
that I mean I'm fine with the convenience of having my face to approve transactions on the phone, but if I walk down the street and somebody calls my name because they recognize me and that person is not somebody I know and not even a person, I get a little freaked out.
right. Right. No,
Yeah.
you're absolutely correct. So just being mindful of your time here, looking forward,
Yeah.
how do you, anything else you can say about the trends, or how do you think things are going to look like and, over the next 12, 24 months?
So I think the trends are going to continue, meaning that we're going to get further clarity, further legislation that will let us know where we're going, and how, and the idea is to better protect personal information. Also, probably additional rules regarding the other types of data that I mentioned in passing, like the important data. Um, and and I think that enforcement will go along with it. So the clearer the rules, the more enforcement we're going to see, and companies need to make sure that they're compliant because it's getting more serious, but it's also getting easier. It's
Mm,
not as scary as you thought,
mm,
but it's something that you need to pay attention to.
mm. Just curious, does Hong Kong have separate set of laws, or did these laws cover Hong Kong? Did you,
These laws do not cover Hong Kong, so Hong
interesting.
Kong has its own rules, and they're not as rigid as the Chinese rules, maybe a little bit simpler.
Mm.
But yes, in many ways,
It's still like a
it's
different
it,
legal jurisdiction.
it is different legal jurisdictions.
Okay.
One country, two systems.
No, no,
Yeah,
in most sense. Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Let's not go there. But
yeah.
okay, that's great. So if anybody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
You could
Email?
email me. Yeah, email is probably the easiest. I'm also on WeChat, but
Well,
and
I will put all your various contact information on the show notes. Also LinkedIn, and to make it easy to reach out to you and to ask you for some help if they need. Um, like always, it's great to catch up with you, to hear the exciting things going on in China. Um,
likewise,
I
pleasure.
again, I haven't been there. I don't travel there as much as I used to, of course. Well, I used to live there, but I was there a couple of months ago. I do hope that things get better there, and the business will start to thrive again in
Mm,
China. It'd be good for all of us. So again, thank you for your input. I look forward to talking to you again, maybe another 6 months or 12 months, and we'll see another update on how things are going. Oh, and for those, I do know that Zach, you also do webinars sometimes in this field. So again, if anybody's interested in that,
yeah,
you can get that information from Zach directly. Thank you again, and
thank you.
we'll be talking again soon.
Bye bye.